Great. All right, everyone. Well, thank you all for joining this afternoon to talk a little bit about capital outlay. If you don't know, my name is State Representative Linda Serrato. I proudly represent the south side of Santa Fe in the New Mexico Roundhouse. And around the corner is the legislative session. It's next Monday. And so it's next Tuesday is a big day to start. So I'm very excited to have that be coming up and around the corner. Just so you all know, on Thursday at noon, I'll be having another Facebook Live / Zoom event to kind of go over what I anticipate for the session and what my priorities are for the session as well. So I'll send out an invite on Facebook and then to the email list as well, so you all know what's coming and are ready for that as well. But I'm very excited for today's capital outlay overview. As I had mentioned in the post, capital outlay request forms or applications are due this Thursday at 3 p.m. And so we'll walk you through what that application looks like. We're also very lucky to have from Legislative Council Services, Michelle Jotsky, who, and I'll have her introduce herself a little further, but she essentially guided me through last year, was very helpful, and really knows the whole process really well. So we're very lucky to have her as a part of today. So excited about that as well. But let's get started. I don't want to hold anybody too long. And just so you know, this will get posted to Facebook later. If there are any questions that pop up, I can share them with Michelle, and we can make sure we respond in the comments on Facebook as well, just to make sure everybody, has their questions answered in time. So a lot of folks may be asking right now, what is the capital outlay process? Why am I doing this? And essentially, capital outlay, there's many different parts to it. But for me, and where I come in as a state representative, is that many years after the budget has been determined, there's an amount of money that is left over. And as a state representative, as state senators, we all have an opportunity to request that those funds be utilized in for different projects. And I'll kind of go through what those priorities are and kind of what that process looks like. But all those come together in a bill, and then we pass that bill, the capital outlay bill, and the governor signs it into law. She can veto particular capital outlay projects. And as we've seen in the past with this governor, if it doesn't look like, for example, if I partially fund a capital outlay project that's not going to be able to be started with that amount of money, she may veto it, because we want to make sure that the public's money is being spent properly and as we want it to be, as we intend. If it's for a project that's not feasible, a lot of times that's a reason why. And so last year, I was pretty pleased. We had a good set of capital outlay projects. In particular, we had a sewer line extended to a county annexation to the city. It hadn't had a sewer line for 20 years, and we were able to get this funded through capital outlay to get the process started. And so I'll kind of talk about using that a little bit more as an example. And so, so a lot of times that's what we kind of look at. A few things that I also want to so when I'm looking at this, again, the state has a framework, the Legislative Finance Council has a framework, and every, I think, individual legislator has a framework as well. And what we're encouraged to look at is, does this project, will that extend 10 years and beyond? And so it's really hard, because a lot of times you're going to say, I want to buy, computers for our local school district or something like that, and it won't go 10 years, right? Computers, especially at schools, if we're lucky, will last a couple of years, maybe 5 if they're really well taken care of. But even then, that doesn't kind of fit that 10-year view of what, as the money comes down out and is dispersed. So we want to make sure that the money is what the money is being spent on will last as long or longer than as long as it's being dispersed. So that's a big element of it as well. For me personally, especially because I represent the south side of the Santa Fe, it's really important to me if I can get projects that are in our district. And that does come up every once in a while, especially, when it comes to parks, or when it comes to, like I said, a sewer line. Those things that you really see as being long-term investments, it's been great to be able to invest in those. But also, does it impact my residents, the people that live on my side of town? Or is this something that I can work with Representative Lujan or Representative Romero or another Representative Chandler, who's in an adjacent district? Can we work on something together to make this work? And so, those are kind of the qualifications. So I look at those, and those really come down to a lot of the requests from the city of Santa Fe for me, the county of Santa Fe, and the college, the community college as well. Sometimes we'll get requests from the public schools as well. Those pop up. Individual charter schools may have requests that come in. We'll look at those as well. And so all of these essentially requests are collected by the LCS, the Legislative Council Services, and I'll walk you through the application in a second. And so they get submitted, and oftentimes, and I love this when this happens, constituents will call me, or other people in the state will say, hey, this project is really important. Please put some of your capital outlay money towards it. And I want to be clear, when I say my capital outlay money, it's not mine, it's the state's, it belongs to you. I'm a conduit to making sure that it gets to these projects that may not go noticed otherwise. I think it's an important element that we remember that capital outlay is an opportunity, and again, very unique, like New Mexico, to connect real projects to the state representatives to getting funded directly. And it's a really great opportunity. And I'm really excited, by the way, side note, that last session we were able to pass a transparency element, so you can see what I requested and what was funded of my requests, so you can see directly what I'm putting that money towards. But I got off track. So anywho, that goes through, and then once the bill is passed, as I mentioned, the governor can veto any individual ones. Once it's passed, once it gets through her and the signature is on the paper, there are essentially 2 disbursement periods. I believe there's one in the summer and one in the fall. It's typically how that works. And so that'll come through, I believe it's DFA that disperses those funds. And so that's when those projects can begin construction or begin working on those. And then I think those are the big pieces I kind of want to walk you through. There's one other element I think it's really important. When we do capital outlay requests, it's always with a political subdivision, or like a city or a county, or maybe it's through an acequia or a political subdivision of the state. And what that means is that I request the money goes to the city of Santa Fe to fund this project for a sewer line, and work with that neighborhood to get that done. And so that's really important. So before you're able to request the money or anything like that, you have to come to a memorandum of understanding with whatever political subdivision can help you with that. And they essentially become your fiscal agent. They're the ones that pull the money through and make that process work smoothly. So a lot of times I'll ask, do you already have an agreement with the city? Have you been working with them? Is this something they can help with? And so that's a really important element, because even if I say, man, your project is fantastic, fixing that street has been needed for years, if there's not a fiscal agent to kind of oversee this process, that money will never get to your project. It won't happen. And so it's really important that there is a fiscal agent that helps with that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to the application just so you guys can check it out for a second. And I will make sure when I share this that you can see it, the link to this as well. But essentially, it's a great link. It's nmlegis.gov capital outlay web, and that's it. Very simple. It's wonderful. And so it requests, if you're looking for a particular ID, you can do that. You can look by submitted projects. But what you need to do is read through this and then acknowledge that you understand the terms and conditions for submitting capital project request. And you click on it, and then this is everything that they're going to ask for. And you'll notice that the application itself is very quick. Getting everything ready for the application, especially arranging that relationship with your county, city, what have you, that's kind of the harder part. And so, they'll ask for the infrastructure capital improvement plan. I'm going to have Michelle go over that a little bit more in detail in a second, because that's a really important element. But then also your name, your title, your information, who, as I mentioned earlier, who is your fiscal agent? So is it the city of Santa Fe, the county? Who's going to be working with you on it? What is the entity requesting the funding if it's not them? I will be honest with you, for the most part, most of the legislators I know, including myself, are really looking for a political subdivision that's going to be able to handle that process. So just so you know. And then who will own the project upon completion. And you can work with your fiscal agent on that as well, because again, most of the cities, towns, villages understand this process pretty well. Where it's going to be located, the county it's going to be located, the total amount requested for the project in this legislative session. That's interesting because again, one of the previous, when I was able to help fund this, utilize these funds to fund a sewer line, the total amount was larger than I was able to fund. However, I asked them, what's a smaller amount that you can get done that'll still be helpful? And they said, okay, we can do it for, I think it was like 300,000 or 350,000. I said, great, that's fantastic, let's do it. And so we were able to fund it at a lower amount. So you may want to work with legislators and say, hey, this whole project is a $1 million project, but if we break it into chunks, this is what it would look like. And this is what's, feasible in this period of time. Brief project description. This is going to also be very helpful, especially as we talk with our colleagues about a project that's exciting to us. That will help them understand what it is, and the description will help. Typically, what I recommend is putting where it helps, what region, and then also, in particular, what what it does. So, a sewer line on blank street in the city of Santa Fe. Something like that is very easy. The project type for the title, and you can see all the different categories. I'll ask Michelle this in a little bit, but typically I've heard, well, I'll come back to this in a second. And then the project subject, what is it? What does it impact? Is it cultural, schools? Who is what theme or area type will it be in? And so then here are the specific questions. Can the project be initiated before June 30th, which is when June 30th, 2024? Will 5% of the appropriation be expended within 6 months of the funds available? Will 85% be expended in 3 years of it becoming available? Are funding sources other than the state providing support for this? Will the requested appropriation be used to match federal funds? All of these, especially, so the first two are you going to use the money immediately? And the last two are, who's helping with this? Is it just us that's doing it? And who's going to make a difference for? I would make the argument, especially for myself, if this is a matching fund for federal funds, especially in this year when we see so many federal funds being distributed, that's going to really get my attention, even if it's outside of my county. And the reason why is because this is there's so much federal money coming into the state, and we want to make sure that, and not only that, but there are competitive grants that are coming, that are available. So we want to make sure that we're utilizing that well. And then here they have a breakdown of how the money will be spent. If it's all in plan and design and acquisition, again, it's harder for legislators to make that argument that we should spend the money on this, because if it's still in the planning stages, it's very early. We want to see some construction happening on there. And then it's describing the project and what, who's impacted, the name of the road, description of what's going to be purchased, description of the facility, all those pieces. And then when you submit it, you can submit it to direct representatives. And the way that I've typically seen them come through for myself last year was that we had last year I can say that now. Last year was I would usually get them for ones that were in my district, ones that were in the city, or ones that may affect my interest area, right? So I'm really interested in economic development. So there's an economic development project that may happen, even in Espanola, I might look at it again, see if there's something I can do to help, especially if it's in Santa Fe, especially like more than definite if it's in my district or adjacent, right? And the reason why is that, for example, my district goes a little north of an airport, but for the most part, airport and rodeo and Zia are my lines, my northern line. And so if it does impact just a little north of there, I'm happy to work with Representative Lujan, who represents that area just above me. What can we do to help this project that helps my residents and yours? And then you submit the request. So like I said, the application is pretty easy. If you're kind of at the beginning points of this, again, I recommend you reach out to your city or county and begin that conversation. To be honest, it may be too late at this point to get that in time for Thursday, unless you've already been in conversations with them. But starting this process now means that you might be all lined up for next January when this comes up again, because this is essentially an annual process. So I'm gonna stop there and see if there's any quick questions from folks. And if not, that's great. Michelle, I would love for you to give a quick, I'm sorry. Yeah, JD.
I have a few questions, Representative. Do you want me to just ask a couple now, or do you want to kick it over to Michelle first?
I might kick it over to Michelle, only because JD, I think you might have advanced questions. So
they are a little more advanced.
Great. So Michelle's going to be Yeah, she'll be my expert on this.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm Michelle Josky. I coordinate the Capital Outlay Division for the Legislative Council Service. I'm so delighted that you have such a thorough and wonderful understanding of all of this and explained it so well. With respect to your question about the ICIP, I'm really not the expert on that. The DFA the Department of Finance and Administration manages that process, but I am familiar with it. It is the Infrastructure Capital Improvement Plan, and all state agencies, all local governments, and anyone who's considered a political subdivision of the state now has tried to participate in that process. It's a 5-year planning process. They may spread out all of their, how their requests for the budget for a particular project across those 5 years. So when we have that starting off thing on our website, and you enter your ICIP, your 5-digit ICIP project number, then you can populate your form using that. You can populate the form with that data by clicking the little tab there. It's not a requirement. Most of the school projects, in fact, none of the school projects have an ICIP number because they use a different planning process. They use a facilities master plan process. And so there are projects that will fall outside of that, but it's been a really important tool for local governments because they can quickly fill out this form. They can pull all their information together from what they've planned out and prioritized in the ICIP. And there is a little thing I'd like to mention about the budget. So we do have that important question about the amount requested this project session or this legislative session. And you're right about that, Representative, that allows people to break things up into phases, because the total project amount that's included in that budget and that comes in from the ICIP is generally a much larger figure. So some people have been confused that the total project costs might exceed the amount they're requesting this session. But if you look at the amount committed or funded to date, and then look at that amount they're requesting now and the total amount requested, you can derive a lot of information about where the project is, in all of those phases on that. So it's been very valuable. And I think, this doesn't really loop back to the ICIP other than it's very important to the governor and to legislators to look at that and know that this project has been planned and it has the support of local government because they prioritize all of those things that way. I did want to note that with on the bond sale dates, so generally bonds are sold in June and December, and there is quite a bit of lag. So the Department of Finance and Administration and the Board of Finance have to look at these projects, get them certified. They have to request bids to issue the bonds. And so even after the bonds are sold in June or December, they still have to go back and work with the local entity and develop a grant agreement. And so this, it can put your project even a year down the line, and it's not a bad thing. It's just that there are certain steps that have to be taken to make sure there's accountability for the funds and that all those things are met. So, but just so people are aware that the funding doesn't come immediately. And I got to some other notes here. I can't read my own writing. Oh, the federal match, that is a really important thing. And we like to put that in the project description if it is matching some federal funds or potentially could match some federal funds, because if it's not included in that description, you may not qualify for further. Sometimes you can qualify for additional federal funding beyond what your initial match is if it identifies it that way.
That's great. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say one more thing about planning. So because most of the projects are funded with severance tax bond proceeds, and planning is not a long-term, because of that, you have to have an asset, a fixed asset of that long-term nature that you described. And planning, while the best thing we could do probably is have a master plan for all of these entities and organizations and areas, that's really not a qualified item under capital outlay. You could do that with general fund money. Generally, they program general fund money for larger scale statewide projects. So just just so that people are aware, because a lot of people do ask for, fund a comprehensive plan or, or something like that, and it really wouldn't qualify.
That's a great note. I think, and I noticed that came up a lot when I first came to office, and I think a lot of folks had that question. One thing I do want to add on ICIP process is that a lot of counties and cities and political subdivisions start that process as early, as I've seen, as early as the summer before. So just be sure to, check the website or call your local city or county or what have you, and just see, what is that that process? When does it start? Are there any Zoom meetings or meetings I can go to learn more? Because every single county or city even does it differently. So just to keep that in mind too. I do have a few questions for you, Michelle, if that's okay for us to run through. Is there anything else you want to hit on before?
No, go right ahead.
Awesome. So you covered the first one. I just kind of want to know what the ICIP process was. That's great. And then I'm curious about your top tips. And if you could break those up, because I do think there are different stages people are at. So if they have a project that's gone through the ICIP project, is there any advice you have for them? If they have a mature project that may not have gone through any of those that process at all, or the school process or anything, do you have any advice for them? And maybe someone, this is just their first project and it really needs to get done as soon as possible. Any recommendations for them as well?
Right. So one thing is that you can skip that first thing. You don't have to have an ICIP number. You start with the project contact information. A lot of the information will be populated anyway once you choose your fiscal agent, where that is and everything like that. And then I see that even though the ICIP process is, it should have been completed in September, and it was, but people, these projects are in process. So a lot of things change. So this year or last year, I think we started this, you can go in and you can modify your ICIP information. So you draw in the majority of it, but things change even in the last couple of months. So you are able to modify the budget and all of those things, your project description, and some of the ICIP information may be broader than this particular phase of your project. So important to identify exactly what you're doing. Well, not exactly, I mean, to have that broad intent of your project and reflect that in your project description. I think you're so right about starting early, because Bernalillo County, for one, every year, the county commission every year passes a resolution, and it names all of the nonprofits that they're going to work with and for whom they will serve as fiscal agent. And that happens in the summer, as you said. And in other areas of the state, in the southeast corner of the state, they have meetings with their legislators as early as October. And those legislators may say, well, you didn't come to our meeting, you didn't present the information. So always good to be aware of what is happening that way. And I have seen projects that are really important, and that people come to us and say, oh, that really don't know how to start off. And so it's fun to help those people get started. And it may be a really important project that just comes up out of the blue. I can think of one that's a transitional living center in Bernalillo County, and they have been very successful over the years in getting this much needed facility established. And but without without having that link at first. So they did, after the fact, go back to Bernalillo County and get that all set up. And so I think it is important to get all those things. And I may have missed one of your questions.
Yeah, just one note. On that, yeah, the sewer project I keep referring back to, I'm sorry, it's a really big proud one for me, partially because they hadn't really been part of an ICIP process before. They'd been a 20-year project they've been working on, got all the local support, did everything. And they'd already worked it out with the city to have a memorandum of understanding that the city would be the fiscal agent. But they just hadn't done that process, the ICIP process, and we were still able to get it funded. So just like you're saying, that you don't always have to go through that. It does help. And it does help the city, and they might bring up your project as being a priority for them. That's wonderful, but it's not always necessary. The only one I mentioned that you didn't is that if someone's really at the beginning stages of this, are there any recommendations you have as well?
I think that is, I think you've already covered that. Really, the most important thing is make that connection with a political subdivision that can serve as your fiscal agent. Or if you're developing a new project in your area, make sure that you talk to your local elected officials and get that started up. Just that interest in your project.
That's great.
There used to be a guideline that about having public input into. I think there still is a guideline. I'm not sure how much that happens outside of city council meetings and county commission meetings and all of that, but
And I'll say, yeah, some of the projects I've spoken to, they're going to have community meetings that I'm going to head to as well. And just to let folks know that these are projects they want to do, especially if it's going to impact a local area more than just, of course, the whole intent of a capital outlay project is that it impacts the community or impacts a neighborhood, impacts a group, our state in a way that's beneficial. But of course, one thing to remember is sometimes there are additional costs that are that may come from that private property owners have to pay or otherwise. And so what made a difference again in the project I looked at, or again, I think I can speak for some of my colleagues, it's probably the same, is that we want to see that the people that are going to be impacted like this project want to be a part of this project. It is a priority for them. So even if it's not, through city council meetings or anything like that, some people brought me a petition. Some people have, again, had like public meetings. There's all different ways to do it. So, and we're also able to help. Like if there's, if it's hard to reach a neighbor or something like that, like I may be able to provide some more information or get the word out, on my social media or anything like that too. So that might help.
If I can just add a couple of things, I am very excited this year because this year you are able to go to that website, and after you complete your form, you can target who you want it to go to. And as Representative Serrato mentioned, it's very important for legislators to know, if it's regional or in their district or this or that. So I'm excited. I think that in combination with our pre-session deadline, which we've never had before, is going to get this information into legislators' hands early enough that they would be able to, and you will have a spreadsheet and you could match up the funding for the projects that you really want to move forward with that of other legislators and perhaps reach that full funding, so we don't have that situation where something's double funded or underfunded when we could work that out, or when y'all could work that out in advance.
And that's a great point too, Michelle. I know for the Santa Fe delegation, we're very lucky. We work very well together. At the county, city, state, both Senate and House, we really do what we can together. And so what that happens a lot regionally, where each region gets together and we talk through, okay, these are the requests that are coming in. Who wants to fund this? Who wants to do that? And it's not a requirement you have to do anything. It's just let's make sure the projects that matter to all of us are getting the funding they need to move forward. So that's a great point. Yeah, it's helpful. And so I'm glad to see the early too, because that means that when all of our conflicting schedules hit, we can find a new time. Again, let's see. I think I asked you my big questions. Are there any other big pieces that you think are important about filling out the application? I'm going to include the phone number we have on the website as well, just so people can have that too. So I'm making notes of things that I think are good for to follow up with.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most confusing thing about the form this year and last year, so we started this up last year, and we realized that we needed to have a way to name these projects so people could look them up and refer to them. And in the past, we would collect this information, and we would establish a project title based on our naming convention. So we tried to do that with asking these questions and matching up certain fields. And so people tend to repeat in the second field. So the first thing that's going to come up is the fiscal agent. That's going to be the first part of your title, and it will populate automatically. And so most people, it's hard to read those instructions because you have to go somewhere else and come back. So frequently we get a lot of double, Santa Fe County, and then the description. So just and it's really not a big deal. It's just something that I think people will get used to, and I think will help the process that these things will get named and people can search for them and find them where they want.
That's great. And actually, I'm curious, I didn't mention this to you before, but when I was looking closer right now, you have entity requesting funding, if not, if different from the fiscal agent. What would that be typically?
So if you did have a nonprofit or someone, for example, I think there's a school in Albuquerque, an adult learning center. So that, or it's in Bernalillo County. So that's a project that Bernalillo County has adopted in their resolution, but the entity wants legislators to know that that's their project. So the first part of the title then is the fiscal agent Bern Co. And then they chose adult learning center. And then whatever, construct. But when you look at the first project, the first part of the project description on the summary sheet, it will say Albuquerque Adult Learning Center is requesting. So it kind of gives legislators a clue that, and they may look at this favorably or not, but that someone is working with a nonprofit organization or someone outside of the traditional political subdivision structure to do this. And
That is
we want
helpful.
to verify that, and that gives us a clue also to verify, if it's outside of Bernalillo County, then we need a fiscal agent letter from someone saying, yes, I'm the fiscal agent, I'm going to own the asset and this and that. So it's a checkpoint for us too.
And that's helpful, I would say, as a legislator, because probably I would say my last checkpoint I do when I'm allotting the funds is I'll go through and say, okay, control F all the projects that have the word Santa Fe in it, right? All the all the ones that may have airport road on it, like just to do a final check to make sure these are projects, and because it's always good to follow up with legislators, but we could have missed an email. We could have missed a call. And so it's really helpful when you have those key phrases, especially regionally or interest wise. There are some legislators committed to ending hunger in New Mexico. So something that says along, food banks, like those keywords really help us when we're trying to make sure we're getting money where it needs to be.
Yes, and so we are also encouraging people to, if they have a community center that's been being funded over time, that they use that same name for that community center so that people can see, track it and follow it.
That's great. That's wonderful. Michelle, if you don't have any additional points, I'm happy to have JD ask any additional questions that he has as well. Does that work for you?
I can't think of anything right now. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you. JD.
All right, thanks so much. I have several questions, Representative Serrato. You can continue recording this if you want, or you can pause the recording. It's totally up to you. These questions, Michelle is going to be able to answer most of them very quickly, but it's up to you.
That's fine. Yeah, we can keep going. And if we need to edit it, we're happy to do it.
Okay. Thank you for being here, Michelle, and thank you for doing this, Representative Serrato. So one technical question about the process, Michelle. Once you list the fiscal agent in the application form, does it automatically show up? Does that acronym for that fiscal agent automatically show up in the title? Or when you get to the title box, do you have to lead with the fiscal agent?
No, it will automatically show up.
That's what I thought, but I was confused when you said that.
See it
Okay.
where you're entering your stuff, but when it gets constructed, it all goes together that way.
Okay, my next question is, the deadline for filing these is 3 p.m. on January 13th. As you know, when you file a project request, you do it anonymously. You don't have to sign in. You don't have to give your name. There's no login, no password. So once you file it, how can you get in there and modify it if there's no recognizing factor that you're the one that did it, and what keeps other people from modifying your application?
Well, that's one reason why you can't go in there and modify it.
You cannot modify it once you
You
file
can
it.
call us and we can we can modify it on our end. I wish that we had some kind of credentialing. We've talked about that, and to make it so that people could go in and out, but it kind of excludes like the new project that we just talked about. And it's also a big investment in time that we haven't had some time with IT to do that. So.
Thank you. Next question is about the Board of Finance, as Representative Serrato mentioned, or you might have mentioned. So they're responsible for authorizing and approving the sale of the bonds. Now, since they have that role, and the Board of Finance, I think, is about 6 people. They're very powerful people. The governor's the chair of it, lieutenant governor's on it. Do any of those members have the authority to override a legislator's capital outlay project request, if they determine that something's problematic about the project or something, they notice that all the I's and T's aren't crossed, do they have the authority to defund that by not issuing a specific bond sale for that project?
So that's a very interesting question. They don't individually, but as a board, they certainly are looking at all of those things, and they can, that project can remain authorized but unissued until
Okay.
whatever their questions are answered.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that.
Actually, JD, can I interrupt at that point?
Yeah.
Would they then notify the legislators or that were involved in that process as well, that that it was authorized but not funded?
No, but you can look that up in the capital program monitoring system. So if there's a hangout, and that happens frequently, that someone on the local level will say, I don't know what's happening with my project. And if we track it down, then it looks like, oh, there was maybe it was an audit issue, and maybe it was just non-reporting or something that is hanging that up, or an anti-donation issue.
And we could contact LCS to help us with that process as well.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Or you can go directly to the DFA.
Right. Oh, right. Absolutely. Thank you. Go ahead, JD. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to piggyback on that question because it's an excellent question. So, Michelle, it sounds like it's at the DFA on their website somewhere. How do you access the capital outlay monitoring program? I get calls by lawmakers occasionally. They'll call me and say, hey, this capital outlay appropriation that I did a couple years ago, it's getting ready to expire. Where's the fiscal agent on this? Is the project moving forward? And they're getting that information somewhere. I would like to get that at the same time they do. So how do you monitor the funding status of these programs?
So I can send you a link to that website. It is, basically there's a sheet of information for each project based on their appropriation ID number that's assigned by the DFA. And then it's 3 parts. So there's reporting by the Board of Finance, by the state agency, and by the local entity. And the reporting does tend to lag a bit. But you can look, as you can definitely determine when the bonds were sold, what the reversion date is for those funds, and all those things. And that's public information, and it's a good way just to look and see that.
Okay, well, that's very, very helpful. Next question is about capacity of capital outlay this year. I just read your capital outlay newsletter that's posted online. And that is a very, very good newsletter, by the way. I think it's a couple pages, has a lot of interesting information. You have the capacity for capital outlay listed, I believe, at around $553 million. Is that correct?
No, actually, that estimate has been revised. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we usually do go back and update that. So I think it's over 660 million now. And gosh, I had a breakdown, but of course, certain things come off the top: water project fund,
Right.
Colonius infrastructure, tribal infrastructure, and
schools.
Yeah. And so I think that about over close to 300 million has been included in the framework that the LFC comes up with for statewide projects. And then that left about 347 million or something right now that will either be, some of that I think will be programmed for statewide projects, because that's a kind of a fluid process. And then whatever remains of that will be the amount that's divided between the governor, the Senate, and the House.
Okay, great. So a quick question now about that formula. So used to be, and it may still be this way, but it has changed. You used to be able to calculate the capacity for the House, the Senate, and the governor simply by taking the pie, in this case, $660 million, and dividing it by 3. Is that still the accurate way to do the formula?
No, it's really not, because, well, first of all, those things come off the top of that. The water projects, tribal, and schools is really a separate, because they're using supplemental severance tax bonds for those. Yeah, some portion gets set aside for that. So all of that comes off the top, and then that balance is what you could divide up into 3, except that the governor and the legislature have agreed that a certain portion of that will be included as legislative statewide projects. So
Right.
those are, higher education projects that are
Right.
really critical, corrections, that kind of stuff. So it gets whittled down to about that 347 at this point. And then I'm assuming that some of that will also, in fact, I think there was a recommendation that like $100 million of that be put back into the severance tax permanent fund as a reserve.
So right now, your estimate is $347 million after everything's been taken off the top for the special funds, approximately?
Approximately, if they decide to take that $100 million out of that, then that would drop it down to, I think it was $106 million. So then you're looking at 240.
40, like 240.
Something. And then I think that, well, it just remains to be seen. I know they have some things in House Bill 2 that may move over into the Capital Bill, and would they use some of that money for that as well? I don't know, but.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about that statewide list. So for example, Coombers Toltec Scenic Railroad that I represent always makes the statewide list at about $1.1 million a year for track repair, that sort of stuff. Now, if they're on the statewide list, do I still have to file and put in a capital outlay project with the LCS and get a capital outlay project ID number? Or do I just let it go because it's quote unquote on the statewide list?
Another interesting question. So that it will be assigned a number anyway, because it's on the statewide list. And people usually, it's easier and better for us to have all of the appropriations for that project made to one project ID number. You don't want to have, it just doubles the paperwork if you have another project. But it's not as visible to legislators if it's a statewide project as it might be otherwise.
Right.
So that would just be something you would need to follow up with legislators. And for a lot of the statewide projects, I noticed that the LSC this year encouraged legislators not to fund statewide projects, and usually they don't. With that exception, that's one exception. There are a few exceptions. And for schools, higher education institutions, some legislators are very invested in those, and they will fund a statewide project to help it get to that point. And all of that framework that LFC does, those requests are much higher than what they have to work with, of course. So, it's not, I don't think that it would be a bad idea to fund some of those projects at a higher level.
Okay, great. And can I get that project ID number from you for that project that's on the statewide list?
Yes, although it hasn't been assigned yet, but when I have it, I'll let you know.
Okay, what happens if it hasn't been assigned yet? We go past January 13th, and lo and behold, a project that you thought was going to be on the statewide list doesn't make the statewide list. What do you do then?
Good question. Well, so what at that point we would be able to catch it up and add that in. But let me look at that, because that is a very interesting question.
Okay. Representative Serrato, I just have 3 more quick questions. Do I have time to ask them?
I love it, and I'm into it. Absolutely.
Yeah, some of these questions are actually beneficial. Okay, so 2 procedural questions, Michelle. Once you put in the CIP number on a capital outlay project request, as you mentioned, everything auto-fills, the fiscal agent, the dollar amounts, everything. Can you override the dollar amount requested if you want to put in more or less than what was automatically downloaded from the CIP number?
Yes, you can. And that's another interesting point, because what the ICIP does not include is the amount that you are requesting this legislative session. So you are always going to have to fill in that number, but you can also override whatever is in the budget that's drawn in from the ICIP. And those are those 5 years of planning, maybe it's just over 3 years or something. But frequently people will say, oh, I just got a grant from whomever. I really want that to show up on here. So we did enable that so that you can make those adjustments.
Okay, great. Second question, Representative Serrato may have hit on it already, but when you check the boxes for lawmakers or the governors, all the people that you want to see this request, how do they see it? Representative Serrato broke it down a little bit, but can you go in a little bit more detail? It sounded like Representative Serrato was saying it gets broken or based on municipality, county, or something else like that. Can you help me understand how the lawmakers see these requests once you check the box for them?
Well, last year, we didn't have this targeting. So everybody got everything unless they asked us, we did this frequently, we narrowed down the information so that it just had the counties that were in that legislator's district. This year, things will be targeted that way. And last year also, we gave everybody spreadsheets. And so we were doing this during the session and they got multiple spreadsheets. This year, they will get that one report at the start of the first week of the session, and it will come as two different views, basically. One will be the traditional report that we used to have, which is just an alphabetical listing of the projects. And then one will be a spreadsheet. So you could sort your spreadsheet by counties or project name or whatever. So we hope that that will provide, people want to deal with it different ways, but.
Yeah, that's the project list that I would get, just so you know, and that's what I anticipated too, that I would break it up by county, and then it has the amounts, and then I think there's a couple other columns, but then the description of the projects. And so that's how I was able to kind of go through and make sure, okay, here's what's going on in Santa Fe County, what's in my area, what's off of Airport Road. It was just a basic control find in an Excel sheet.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I don't know, some people did not appreciate that, but I think it's useful.
It worked.
All right, thank you so much. Here's my last question, and it's more of a question about the Junior Appropriation Act. Now, we've been talking about capital outlay, which is all funded through bond sales, but I'm assuming there's going to be another junior bill, and junior bill money is unrestricted cash, and it is also spent at the discretion of lawmakers. So I don't know if you can answer this, Michelle, but I'm curious. Two questions on the junior. There's always been a $50,000 base level for the junior bill. Is that $50,000 minimum that has to be met? Is that for the entire project? Or if three lawmakers or two lawmakers put in towards a $50,000 junior bill, can they each do $25,000 towards that 50? Or do lawmakers have to allocate those $50,000 as a block? And the second part of the question is, if you have a capital project ID number, can lawmakers put their junior money, which is cash, toward a capital outlay project that's been filed at the LCS? That's it. That's all I have.
Michelle, would you like me to take part of this, or you can go ahead and take the lead on it? I'm happy with that.
Maybe you can't answer that question, because I think in the past they have said you've got to do $50,000 at a shot, but I have also seen those amounts broken up, and those guidelines come directly from the House Appropriations Finance and the Senate Finance. So.
Yeah, so that's really, that's by the discretion of the chamber, and it really, as Michelle mentioned, comes from the chairwoman of Appropriations, so Patricia Lundstrom, and the chairman of Senate Finance, which is George Munoz. And so as she was mentioning, and like you said, in the past, JD, we were told $50,000 per project. That was anticipated each of our contributions, so that you weren't giving 10K here, 5K here. They wanted to see solid amounts. And for last year, for example, our junior money had to go through the appropriations and had to be heard. So if it was more than the $50,000, if it went through, and I'll go through this a little bit more after, but if it went through the proper channels, it went through like that. But if you're asking for 35,000, then you would have to explain, this project is for 150. We have, 5 legislators or whatever that want to be involved. This is why it's slightly less. And then it really is up to that committee to determine that's okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. That helps solve some of the mystery because as Michelle said, I've seen the junior money bill all over the place too. Thanks.
Yeah. And just so everyone knows, so what JD is talking about is that after the budget is finished, and then after we have finished with the capital outlay project, then there have been some years, especially when, and as JD mentioned, this year there's a bit more in the kitty than there has been in the past. So I think a lot of folks are expecting there'll be a junior bill, but after the budget has been passed, then they see how much money is left over, to put it in really simple terms, and then they'll say, okay, there's a junior bill, all the members get X amount of money. I believe last year we each got 150,000, and not get, again, it's public money, but that we are assigned about $150,000 that we can spend. And last year, and I'm anticipating it'll be similar, but you had to fund it through a department or an agency of the state. And so, for example, I was able to put, I believe, a bit towards outdoor recreation for kids. And so this was a request from the conservation voters of New Mexico that we put it into a project that got city kids out into the outdoors. It's a project through one of the departments. And so outdoor recreation, I believe, was a department that would make the most sense if I remember right. And so anywho, I put 50,000 to that. But as JD mentioned, I had really wanted to do a lump for the food depot, but they were already actually covered. They had enough from throughout the state, enough, hunger advocates, I would say, or ending hunger advocates, I should say, to change that. And so that money comes up later. As JD mentioned, it's a bit looser. You don't have to have a fiscal agent, but you already have to have funding through the state, because you already have to know what project it goes under. And this was hard for some of my projects I wanted to work with. They knew that they were funded through, let's say, Children, Youth, Families Department. They knew they were funded through CYFD. They didn't know the funding stream particularly. They didn't know what that code was. And so that was a really big piece, that if you're asking for it, you have to tell us what's the funding stream that you get from the department that you're working with that it goes through. The neat thing about doing a junior bill is that sometimes those same projects, if it's general enough, if it's not just for my community, if it's for, again, getting city kids out into the nature, it's possible that becomes a reoccurring fund. You can't guarantee that, but it's a possibility depending on the next year's budget, that, hey, this worked out well last year, we'd like to see this funding continue. So that's how the junior bill works. We won't truly know until last year, Michelle, we didn't know until midway through the session. Is that probably about normal?
I think so. It always seems to be a last minute thing from our perspective. And then, of course, all those forms and all that's coming from the committees and not from us. We see it even later. So
yeah, and it's true, because even last year with the capital outlay process, that, like, as you mentioned, the deadline was during session last year. There was still ample time to kind of look at projects and understand what was going on. With the junior money, as we call it, that was just full speed ahead, get your projects, do it now. So, and again, with me, and when I look at these, I look at what's going to impact my community, right? So I represent Airport Road, where a lot of folks are, dependent on public transportation. They may not have reliable cars to get to the mountains or anything like that, and make sure that people had that same connection, that we enjoy in New Mexico. That's why I put it towards that. But I also put it towards the Boys and Girls Club of Santa Fe as well, for their summer projects, especially considering COVID, that they were able to still have their program that they wanted. So, that's, and it's interesting, you may even have, legislators like myself reach out and say, hey, I have, another $50,000. Do you all have problems getting funding for the summer movies for the kids? Do you have problems getting PPE? Like, how can we help you get what you need? So just so you know, if you see this and this happens, don't be surprised that we may ask you for those details as well.
That is so helpful. What about the last part of the question? Last year, I got mixed messages. Some lawmakers told me that junior money, which is cash again, absolutely cannot go toward anything that capital outlay can fund, like no equipment, no tangible assets. But then I heard other lawmakers tell me that they can spend junior money at their discretion and they can put it toward anything they want. Can you put junior money toward a capital outlay project?
I'd love to, Michelle, I'll let you answer if you can, but if you can't, I'd love to follow up on that as well. But go ahead, Michelle, sorry.
No, go ahead. I have gotten mixed messages about that as well. And I know that last year there was direction from either Senate Finance or House Appropriations that don't fund capital, but there's no restriction on the funds, and people did fund capital.
And that's why I think, I don't know if it's really a loophole or what it is. But again, because again, I can say that this money is going towards youth services through CYFD's X fund, code number 87151. And then as long as that's towards youth services, you know what I mean? And it is, it should be, and that should be fine, right? So I don't know that, again, this should be a conversation I've already had with Boys and Girls Club. But if they're buying vans, right, or if they're doing something like that, maybe that's how that loophole worked. But, JD, I was given the same instruction. You shouldn't use it for capital outlay. But I think that's how some people ran that, was that they were able to, again, if as long as it went through the right funding stream, that may be how that happened, because we it's not that same, it's not as restrictive as capital outlay is.
Yeah, and when you provided a little bit of junior money to Boys and Girls Clubs, you sent that money to CYFD, correct?
Right.
Okay.
It went to CYFD to that funding stream. And then again, different legislators are different. I followed up and I was like, hey, is this money going towards this project? And they said, yep, that's the way it goes there, or what have you. And so that was, it was pretty easy. But a lot of times, we won't follow up on that. We're just going to presume that it did get there. So it's always worthwhile to follow up with us and say, hey, is it going to the right stream? Is it going to the right entities,
Well, thank you. I have no more questions. I can't thank you enough for your patience and you answered all of them. And a couple of those were technical. So Linda, I can't thank you enough for doing this. I've had, I'm pretty well versed on this, but there are areas that are still a little gray to me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. And thank you, Michelle, for all of your technical assistance. If we didn't answer your question today or anything like that, please let me know if there is anything else you all need. I'm happy to follow up with Michelle and get the answers that everybody needs. But otherwise, hopefully we'll see you all on Thursday for again at noon for what I anticipate is coming up on the legislative session. I'm hoping we'll know more from the governor by then and have an idea of what we're expecting to see hit, and literally what I'm looking at for the session as well. So thank you, Michelle, again. I don't know if you had any last words you wanted to say.
Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, everyone have a great day, and again, I'll post this later. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.